Want to do just a quick update since there's been a lot of press about it, about the situation involving the leaked opinion from the Supreme Court. So I'm going to call this midweek update, breaking the new status quo on Roe. So what happened last night was Politico, which is a left-leaning blog, political reporting organization, put this up late last night in the evening about the Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights, a draft opinion shows. It immediately caused a lot of controversy and review. Pundits were weighing in. It appears from looking at the opinion and what the way that it came down, that it was probably leaked. First of all, it appears to be authentic. It's a draft from February 10th of a majority decision overturning Roe versus Wade and its progeny, which would also include Casey versus Planned Parenthood. The majority decision purports to have been written by Justice Alito. It does read like it was from Justice Alito. It is, the opinion itself is about 66 to 70 pages long, and then there's about 25 pages of a appendix of different abortion laws in different states and that sort of thing that supports the decision. It does read like it was written by Justice Alito. It is consistent with statements that he's made. Now, it's interesting, only the majority opinion was released. So that this seems to support speculation that this was done by a clerk or a staffer, and some have even suggested one of the left-leaning justices of the court, and it was done with the intention of influencing someone who's not yet decided on the opinion that's going to be issued by the court to change their vote. And until the opinion is actually issued by the court, it's not final. And votes can be changed right up until the last minute. So this is not something I think that's without, in some respects, it's not without precedent, because I think there was a lot of political pressure put on the court by people with regard to Obamacare. And we know that what happened on that Chief Justice Roberts caved in an epic failure of what everybody thought was his judicial philosophy. So there's some thinking that this is really unprecedented. They've never had a draft opinion leak from the court. This has never happened in the history of the court. Chief Justice Roberts has issued a couple of statements saying that, well, the court's not going to be subject to pressure. There's a lot of question about what can be done, what should be done. Some people think that they should issue an opinion right away. I kind of lean that way myself. They could do that in one of two ways. They could issue a full decision, tell everybody, get your opinions in by the end of the week, and all the judges have I think 4 law clerks that just sit there and help them write opinions and do research and that sort of thing. It's a very prestigious position. People that have been, for example, Laura Ingraham, who's has a show on Fox News. She was a former Supreme Court clerk for Justice Thomas. But it's very clear when they're hired that you do not leak opinions. This is just, it doesn't even happen very often in trial courts or court of appeals at the state, local, or federal level. It's just not done. Whoever has done this needs to be fired. If they're a lawyer, they need to be disbarred and barred from the practice of law for life. This is a very egregious violation. And if it's a judge that did it, a justice that did it, then that justice needs to go through an immediate impeachment. But you're going to see a lot from all the pro-abortion blogs and political people political action committees. They're going to be praising this, that this was done. This was done to protect the innocent, but we know that this is just a big smokescreen. So it appears right now, based on what everybody's sort of trying to ascertain from the court, is that the decision is going to be a 5-4 decision. It might be 6-3, but everybody expects that Roberts will try to do a compromise decision like he did on Obamacare, which really was not a compromise decision. It was just very weak, and it led to some bad law. But again, if the opinion is going to be this way and they're going to overturn Roe, I don't think anybody who watches the court has any doubt that the decision is going to be written by Alito. As the court went through these hearings on the Mississippi law that's at issue in this case, Thomas Dobbs case that's before the court, it was pretty clear that if the judicial giant who is going to write this very important decision was going to be Justice Samuel Alito. So I'm just going to look at the opinion in brief. Now, what happened was immediately last night when this was issued, it was almost as if people knew. They started putting up barricades around the Supreme Court. And last night and this morning, there were protests outside the Supreme Court. You saw people like Senator Elizabeth Warren, a.k.a. Pocahontas, was there protesting. And pro-life groups that have long wanted to get Roe overturned were there protesting as well. So this was front page news on a lot of newspapers across the country. Some sort of ignored it. Wall Street Journal was buried on about page 7 or 8. But that it just may be because they were putting the paper into press when this decision was released. But this is something that's not completely unexpected. So I'm going to go through the decision, then I'll tell you what impact this will have on abortion in the United States. So the opinion is written by Alito, and he starts off, abortion presents a profound moral issue on which Americans hold sharply conflicting views. And you can see that this is a first draft of an opinion, and it's dated February 10th. All of this does sort of add some authenticity to it. And also I might add, by the way, while everybody wants to jump all over whoever it was that leaked this from inside the court, we also need to jump all over Politico, because Politico has done has participated in what amounts to an act of insurrection against the court. And this really undermines the court. It shouldn't be allowed to stand. And Politico can send their guys on MSNBC, the reporters and everything that did this. But these people, they had the discretion not to publish this. They could have done that, but they decided to do it. So let's look at what the draft opinion says. And again, understand, we don't know that this is final or anything like that. But let's assume that Justice Alito wrote this. And again, it's very well written, very scholarly opinion. It details the history of what happened with Roe versus Wade, and then its follow-on case, Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And Alito makes or whoever wrote this opinion, I assume it's Alito, makes some very good points about why Roe should be overturned. And he says this: until the latter part of the 20th century, there was no support in American law for a constitutional right to obtain an abortion. Zero. None. No state constitutional provision had recognized such a right. Until a few years before Roe was handed down, no federal or state court had recognized such a right, nor had any scholarly treatise of which we are aware. And although law review articles are not reticent about advocating new rights, the earliest article proposing a constitutional right to abortion that has come to our attention was published only a few years before Roe. And he's exactly right. This really kind of came out of left field. He also cites some older scholars, legal scholars, Hale and Blackstone, and they talk about, Roe was very bad from a historical perspective. It just sort of made things up. And I remember I started law school just a few years after the Roe versus Wade decision came down. My constitutional law professor in law school, I would put him as someone in the liberal orientation of someone like Alan Dershowitz from Harvard. He's left-leaning, but he's liberal, and so he does have the ability to reason. And I remember my professor saying this decision was going to cause a lot of problems. It was not very well written. It was not very well thought out, and they just kind of made it up. And so as they tried to make up this right, they sort of looked to things like, well, the Fourth Amendment has a right of privacy, and there was a case in 1967 called Griswold versus Connecticut that sort of recognized that right of privacy. And then in the Fifth Amendment, you have the right to not incriminate yourself. So the court sort of mashed up all of these rights of privacy, and then Roe came out and said, well, we don't really find it in the Constitution, but we find it in the penumbra and the shadows and the emanations of the Constitution. And it was a horrible decision, and as a result, tens of millions of babies have been aborted in the United States without any consequence. So in this opinion, assuming it's Alito, says, notably Blackstone, like Hale, did not state that this proto-felony murder rule required that the woman be quick with child, only that she be with child. That would mean, for example, if a woman was murdered and she was pregnant, the Roe case sort of said, well, the child had to reach the state of viability, and that's when this whole viability thing started to come in. So as this opinion continues, and it is revealing that Hale and Blackstone treated abortionists differently from other physicians or surgeons who caused the death of the patient without any intent of doing the patient any bodily harm. These other physicians, even if unlicensed, would not be guilty of murder or manslaughter, but a physician performing an abortion would, precisely because his aim was an unlawful one. Further on in the opinion, it says this: in some, although common law authorities differed on the severity of punishment for abortions committed at different points in pregnancy, none endorsed the practice. Moreover, we are aware of no common law case or authority, and the parties have not pointed to any that remotely suggest a positive right to procure an abortion at any stage of pregnancy. I mean, this opinion is epic. So then the opinion goes into certain factors as to why Roe should be overturned. And I'll just look at one or two of those to keep this short, because it's like, again, you can get the opinion and go to the Politico website and download it. And one of the reasons why you overturn a case is because it was just wrongly decided. Now you're going to see, and I already saw a bunch of news reports today, that Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch, when they and even Alito, when they were questioned while they were coming up for confirmation as a justice, they were asked, well, what about Roe versus Wade? And all of them said that they agreed with the concept of stare decisis. So now that's being translated into, well, they promised that they would never overturn Roe versus Wade. And this is just an egregious lie that's being done by CNN and MSNBC and the usual suspects. Because the concept of stare decisis does not mean that you can never overturn a decision. You can overturn a decision that's clearly wrong. And I think in this case, this is what everybody was talking about. So this is what the opinion says, just in summary. Roe was also egregiously wrong and deeply damaging. For reasons already explained, Roe's constitutional analysis was far outside the bounds of any reasonable interpretation of the various constitutional provisions to which it vaguely pointed. Roe was on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided, and Casey perpetuated its errors. And the errors do not concern some arcane corner of the law of little importance to the American people. Rather, Wielding nothing but raw judicial power, the court usurped the power to address the question of profound moral and social importance that the Constitution unequivocally leaves for the people. This is exactly correct. Roe found that the Constitution implicitly conferred a right to obtain an abortion, but it failed to ground its decision in text, history, or precedent. It was wrong. So the opinion concludes with this: we end this opinion where we began. Abortion presents a profound moral question. The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion. Roe and Casey arrogated that authority. We now overrule those decisions and return that authority to the people and their elected representatives. The judgment of the Fifth Circuit is reversed. Case remanded for proceedings consistent with this. So what does it mean? It means exactly what that last conclusion says. It means that this decision now, it doesn't outlaw abortion. It returns things to the state, and each state will make a determination as to whether abortion is going to be allowed. Now, I talked a little bit about this last Sunday. In fact, just Sunday in my update on May 1st. Washington Post, now maybe Washington Post knew that something was coming. They know that this decision on the Mississippi case was going to come this term. Usually that decision would be issued in the latter part of June. Remember, the same-sex marriage case, Obergefell, came out on June 28th or June 30th in 2015. So it was expected that this case was going to be decided, and most people who are watching the court thought that Roe's going to be overturned or Roe's going to be limited in some way. So on Sunday, I think in advance of that, the Washington Post had a big article about what's going on with abortion legislation nationwide, because there's a lot of states, have reached these compromises that if you're someone who wants to abolish abortion, all of these laws pretty much in most of the states that have been enacted, because of the way the Supreme Court was ruling, people felt they had to compromise, and they had to try to limit abortions as much as they could. And it was always a constant back and forth in the courts. So, some of the states have 15-week bans. Texas has a kind of unique ban. And so what's going to happen now with these different bans, like bans on abortion pills, and some states that have gone very far in protecting the right to abortion. You can see those there on the right side of the slide. The states on the West Coast, Colorado, Illinois, New York, the usual suspects that you would expect. The liberal states, the ones that were allowing abortion before Roe versus Wade was decided, are going to continue to allow it. The other thing that's going to happen if Roe versus Wade is overturned, though, is there are about 13 states that have enacted what's called trigger laws. The laws essentially say that if Roe or Casey are overturned, then the law of our state will be that abortion is illegal, for the most part illegal in that particular state. So there are 13 states that have done that. I think other states will start enacting legislation to prohibit abortion. Others are going to make it more readily available. I'm pretty sure you'll probably see the pro-abortion groups that will come out and say, hey, if you want an abortion, we're going to raise money and we're going to pay to get you to a state where you can get an abortion. I'm pretty sure that that's going to happen. And really the only way that you're going to get this thing banned in the United States across the board is you're going to have to enact an amendment to the Constitution that prohibits it. I don't see any other way. So we can be glad that there are going to be restrictions allowed on abortion, it appears, unless somebody changes their mind after the leak of this decision. And I just don't see that happening in this particular case. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. It's still going to be a big fight. And if everybody wants to get abortion totally eradicated in the United States, it's going to take a constitutional amendment. So that's just a brief update. This is, again, this is one of these unprecedented things that we see happening. But this was, in my view, an act of insurrection against the Supreme Court and as an institution, and it's just part of the tearing down of institutions that we're seeing in our society, particularly by people on the left. This is so it's a mixed bag. We're glad to see Roe overturned, but that doesn't mean that the fight is over. But the way that this thing was leaked is indicative of a very, very bad political process that we have going on in the United States. So that's a quick update. Leaked opinion seems to indicate that the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which is good news, but that still leaves a lot of work to be done.